Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. And today we're talking about something almost everyone has experienced at some point. That moment when you walk into your kitchen and spot a thin line of ants marching across your countertop. And while most people's first reaction is just annoyance followed by a quick wipe down with a paper towel, what's actually happening when ants invade your kitchen is a lot more interesting, and honestly more informative about your home than most people realize. So let's break down what's really going on, starting with the most basic question. Why do ants show up in the first place? The short answer is resources. Ants are opportunistic foragers, meaning scout ants are constantly leaving the colony in search of food, water, and sometimes shelter. And a kitchen, from an ant's perspective, is basically a five-star resource hub. Crumbs on the counter, a dab of spilled juice, pet food left out overnight, even the residue inside an unwashed recycling container. All of it represents an easy, energy-efficient meal compared to whatever the ants would otherwise have to find outdoors. And this brings us to the first big misunderstanding people have, which is that seeing ants means your kitchen is dirty. And while cleanliness certainly plays a role, it's not the whole story. Ants are also drawn indoors by weather conditions, particularly heavy rain or extreme heat. During rainy periods, ants may move into a home to escape flooded nests, and during hot, dry spells, they may come inside searching for water sources like a leaky pipe, a pet's water bowl, or condensation around a sink. So a sudden appearance of ants doesn't necessarily mean anything has changed inside your home. It might simply reflect a change in conditions outside. Now let's talk about how ants actually find their way to your kitchen in the first place, because this is where things get genuinely fascinating from a biological standpoint. Ants communicate primarily through chemical signals called pheromones. When a scout ant finds a food source, it doesn't run back and somehow tell the rest of the colony verbally. Instead, it lays down an invisible pheromone trail on its way back to the nest, and other worker ants that encounter this trail follow it directly to the food source, reinforcing the trail with their own pheromones as they go. This is why you often see ants moving in a single, remarkably efficient line rather than wandering randomly around your kitchen. That line is essentially a chemical highway. And it's also why simply squishing the ants you see on your counter does very little to solve the underlying problem. Because the trail remains, and new ants will continue to follow it until the scent naturally fades or is deliberately removed, which is an important practical takeaway. Wiping down the trail with a cleaning solution, particularly something with vinegar or soap that breaks down the pheromone residue, is often more effective at stopping the immediate invasion than any amount of swatting. Understanding this pheromone system also helps explain another common observation, which is that ants seem to appear almost out of nowhere, and in large numbers, very quickly. Once a stable food source is found, a colony can mobilize a large number of workers to exploit it within a matter of hours. Because the pheromone trail effectively recruits more and more ants as it strengthens. So what looks like a sudden explosion of ants is really just the visible endpoint of a recruitment process that's been happening chemically the whole time. Now, let's talk about what kind of ants you're actually likely to be dealing with, because the answer affects both how serious the situation is and what kind of approach will actually solve it. The most common household invaders in many regions are what's called odorous house ants, so named because they release a distinct, often described as rotten coconut-like smell when crushed. These ants are typically small, dark brown to black, and are primarily drawn to sugary substances. Another extremely common household ant is the pavement ant, which nests outdoors in cracks in sidewalks, driveways, and foundations, and which often enters homes searching for both sweet and greasy food residues. In warmer climates, homeowners frequently encounter Argentine ants, which are notable for forming enormous, interconnected supercolonies, meaning multiple nests cooperate rather than compete, which can make them particularly persistent and difficult to fully eliminate. And then there's the carpenter ant, which is a genuinely more serious concern, because unlike the other species mentioned, carpenter ants don't just forage for food indoors. They can establish nests within the wood of your home itself, particularly in areas with elevated moisture, like around leaking pipes, poorly sealed windows, or damaged roofing. Carpenter ants don't eat wood the way termites do, but they excavate it to create smooth tunnels for their nests, which over time can cause meaningful structural damage if left unaddressed. So if you're seeing large ants, often black or a combination of black and reddish coloring, and especially if you notice small piles of what looks like fine sawdust near baseboards, window sills, or door frames, that's a signal worth taking seriously and potentially worth having a pest control professional inspect, because this points toward an active nest inside your home structure rather than a simple foraging trail, which is a meaningfully different and more involved problem to solve. This distinction actually gets at the core message of this video, which is that seeing ants in your kitchen isn't a single, uniform problem with one universal solution. It's a signal that requires a bit of investigation. Are you seeing a thin trail of small ants beelining to a crumb near the toaster? That's very likely a straightforward foraging issue solvable with cleaning and some targeted bait. Are you seeing larger ants appearing repeatedly near a specific wall or window regardless of how clean the kitchen is? That's a signal potentially pointing toward an entry point or even a nearby or in-home colony that's worth investigating further. Now let's talk about what actually works when it comes to addressing an ant problem, because there are a lot of half-effective home remedies floating around online, and it's worth separating what genuinely helps from what's mostly folklore. The first and most fundamental step is source reduction, meaning removing the specific food or water source that attracted the ants in the first place. This includes wiping up crumbs and spills promptly, storing food, including pet food, in sealed containers, taking out trash regularly, and fixing any small leaks or sources of standing water. This alone often resolves minor, occasional ant sightings without any further intervention needed. The second step, for trails that have already been established, is cleaning the trail itself with a solution that breaks down the pheromone markers. As mentioned earlier, a simple mixture of water with vinegar or a mild soap works well for this, and is both safe and inexpensive. The third and often most effective tool for more persistent infestations is bait. Rather than sprays that kill ants on contact, slow-acting bait stations work by allowing foraging ants to carry poisoned bait back to the colony, where it's shared among other workers, and crucially, the queen. This is important because killing the visible foraging ants you see on your counter does nothing to address the colony itself, which will simply continue sending out new foragers, whereas bait that makes it back to the nest can meaningfully reduce or eliminate the colony over time. It's also worth noting that contact sprays, while satisfying in the moment, can actually make some ant problems worse, particularly with species like Argentine ants that respond to a perceived threat by budding, meaning the colony splits into multiple smaller colonies to protect the queen. So an aggressive spray approach can sometimes transform one manageable trail into several separate ones. Sealing entry points is another meaningful long-term step. Ants are capable of entering through remarkably small gaps, so caulking cracks around windows, doors, baseboards, and utility entry points, along with trimming vegetation that touches the exterior of your home. Since branches and shrubs often serve as natural bridges for ants to reach your walls, can meaningfully reduce the likelihood of repeated invasions, and for persistent, large-scale, or structurally concerning infestations, particularly anything involving carpenter ants or a recurring, hard-to-locate nest, it's genuinely worth consulting a licensed pest control professional, since they have access to inspection techniques and treatment options that go well beyond what's practical for a homeowner to do independently, and they can help identify whether there's an underlying moisture or structural issue contributing to the problem. So to bring this all together, the next time you spot a line of ants in your kitchen, know that you're looking at the visible tail end of a sophisticated chemical communication system. That the species and pattern you're observing actually tells you something meaningful about the scale and type of problem you're dealing with, and that the most effective response usually isn't the ants you can see, but rather removing the resource that drew them in, disrupting the trail they're using to communicate, and, where necessary, using bait to address the colony at its source rather than just its foragers. Ants are honestly one of the more remarkable examples of collective, decentralized problem-solving in the natural world, and understanding a little bit about how their system works doesn't just make for an interesting fact. It genuinely makes you better equipped to deal with them the next time they show up uninvited. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this interesting, please like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into the everyday things around us that most people never stop to think about. And I'll see you in the next one.